So let's get right into it and jump into the first topic. Jim, can you spend some time talking about the changes to the NEC defining reconditioned equipment?
Sure, Phil. There are a number of changes throughout the National Electrical Code in 2020 that will specifically address reconditioned equipment. So in some cases, we're going to tell you that this piece of equipment cannot be reconditioned. In some cases, we'll tell you that it can be reconditioned. Many types of equipment aren't addressed at all, but there are some marking requirements that we'll get into later that will address that. But in order to fully understand requirements for reconditioned equipment, we must first make sure that we understand what reconditioned is. There's a new definition of the term reconditioned, and it's located in Article 100. And let's take that apart piece by piece. The first sentence starts, electromechanical systems, equipment, apparatus, or components that are restored to operating conditions. That's important, and it's written very carefully, because what this means is that the equipment was not in an operating state. It wasn't functional, and we had to take action to bring it into an operating state. The next sentence starts with, this process differs from normal servicing of equipment that remains within a facility or replacement of listed equipment on a one-to-one basis. So we're completely differentiating reconditioned equipment from equipment in your facility that has normal servicing, normal maintenance to that equipment. So one example there would be a low voltage power circuit breaker. We're going to bring in a contractor that is going to maintain that equipment for us. They may change contacts, springs, etc. That's normal servicing, and it does not render that piece of equipment as reconditioned. We also, in that last sentence, addressed replacement of listed equipment on a one-to-one basis. So if I've got a piece of equipment and I have to replace it entirely or a piece of it, it's not reconditioned because I'm replacing one listed part with another listed part. There is an informational note that follows this definition to clarify that in some cases, reconditioned is referred to as rebuilt, refurbished, or remanufactured. So let's take a look at some of the changes that are impacted by this new definition of reconditioned. Chad?
Yeah, no, thanks, Jim. You know, it's really interesting as we look at what is covered and what's not covered, and certainly Jim starts us in the key place, which is the definition, because the definition is really carefully worded. So the definition is clear that reconditioning doesn't include product updates. So if a product is in working order and you're doing a software update or a firmware update to something such as a meter or some other piece of software, that's not falling into the category of reconditioned. The code goes on in specific sections, which we don't have time to go into all of them here, but it lists products that can or cannot be reconditioned based on the type of product. So we see things such as molded case circuit breakers, which are clearly identified as something that cannot be reconditioned. And then items such as low voltage power circuit breakers, as Jim just mentioned, that are built for servicing. And those products are built and could be reconditioned and reused. Panel boards are an example of something that cannot be reconditioned. But again, a panel board is a listed interior system of bus and insulation system. The entire panel board itself could be replaced. That would be a listed part replaced with a listed part, and that's permitted. Switchboards and switchgear, motor control centers, large products such as those lend themselves to reconditioning, and as you go into those sections of the NEC, you will see the allowances for reconditioning. Transfer switches, whether we're talking about Article 700, 701, or 702, or 708, it's clearly stated that transfer switches are items that cannot be reconditioned. And Alan, I may jump to you here. These changes come from NEMA-based guidance that were public inputs to the NEC process.
Well, absolutely, and I think we have some long-standing NEMA guides that establish some great recommendations, and we saw that unfold right around the flooding and the water damaged equipment guide that NEMA developed, and then that transferred to a lot of the fires that unfolded, right? So we have the fire and fire damage guide from smoke. And now we have a new one coming that's for earthquake. So all these are different environmental aspects, right? I mean, the water can leave contaminants, the fire can leave soot and some other contaminants within that equipment. And obviously an earthquake can shake and create different damage aspects within those guides. And so those guides also explain what can be reconditioned and what can't be reconditioned. And if they talk about being reconditioned, you really need to reach out to the manufacturer and look for guidance on how to get that done and get it done in a safe manner.
Yeah, and one more piece in the definition of reconditioned. We say normal servicing of equipment that remains within the facility. And we do need to touch on that a little bit because that could mean one building. I could have a campus-style environment with multiple buildings, or I could have a utility, for example, that has multiple cell sites. So as long as that equipment is normally serviced and is kept within the facility. If I've got equipment that, for example, goes underwater in a flood in Florida, and now somebody buys that and it goes to Minnesota, now they have reconditioned it because it's not in operational condition. Now we've got a piece of reconditioned equipment that may be for sale. And there is a requirement, a marking requirement that we're going to get into that is going to significantly impact any reconditioned equipment, and we'll go to Mike for that.
Thanks, Jim. Hey, the process of reconditioning equipment is not new to the electrical industry. It really just started being identified in the NEC in the 2017 cycle. That was the first phase of evolving the NEC in a way where it can start addressing reconditioned equipment and those processes. It started in 11021A2 with a general requirement that equipment be marked with the name, trademark, or other descriptive mark from the organization responsible for the reconditioning, and a date, the date that the reconditioning process happened. So it needs to be identified as reconditioned in accordance with those marking requirements, and the date has to be applied. And what's new for 2020 is the original listing mark has to be removed. The original listing or product certification is usually impacted by the process of reconditioning. So this is a practical change that actually aligns with the expectations of both manufacturers and qualified electrical testing laboratories.
Great. And then what about contractors? Would they need some type of third-party field evaluation?
Well, actually, authorities having jurisdiction typically base their approvals, Phil, on a product certification or a listing mark. If the listing of a product is impacted by the reconditioning process, it may trigger a requirement for a field evaluation that an AHJ can use as a basis for approving that unique installation or that specific installation involved in the reconditioning.
And this requirement does not mean that you've got to take the nameplate off of that piece of equipment. What you need to do is you need to just obliterate the listing mark. And that's really important from the listing agency and the manufacturer's perspective, because I've got a piece of equipment that was built to a given product standard when it was brand new. If it leaves a facility, it's not in operating condition, and somebody reconditions it, the question is, does it meet the applicable requirements of that product standard after it was reconditioned? So that's why we have to remove that listing mark and mark it with the name of the entity that did the reconditioning and the date, because now they're responsible for that piece of equipment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jim, that's a great point, because the product standards get updated for safety as well as the NEC. So there are new requirements that the standard would have in place for some of these products, and that's an important factor as you reevaluate a reconditioned piece of equipment. The other piece is, and Alan mentioned this, is to keep the manufacturer involved in your reconditioning decision process. Many times the actions of reconditioning can cause more damage to the equipment. And that's why you'll find the basis of some products where the NEC says should not be reconditioned. And in any case, refer to the manufacturer's instructions.
That's a great point, Chad. I think in many respects, the including reconditioning of equipment in the NEC actually fills a gap. It continues to allow the NEC to support the safe, sound growth in our business of the reconditioning process, but also it levels the playing field for those organizations that are involved in that aspect of the work, and everyone would have to play by the same rules. I think it's a major win from a consistency standpoint.